At the southern edge of New Mexico, where the desert stretches toward the horizon and silence carries more weight than words, lies a town too small for most maps. For the people of Las Pedras, it was enough, a quiet place of dusty paths, weathered signs, and a broken church that hadn't heard its bells ring in over 2 years. Every morning, before the first light broke over the cacti standing sentinel under the stars, one porch light flickered on. Wei Chen, 53, rose not to the sound of an alarm but to the pull of habit, duty, and a quiet conversation with someone no longer present. In his modest trailer at the town's edge, where summer rain seeped through the roof and the floor groaned under worn boots, Wei lit a single candle before a small altar tucked into the corner of his kitchen. Among faded photographs and well-used tools stood a tiny statue of Kuan Yin, slightly chipped but cherished. He touched it gently each morning, whispering, "Keep me safe today and watch over my children." Wei wasn't a man of grand speeches. He was a builder, hands roughened by work, skin bronzed by the desert sun, a man who knew loss and labor more than ease. His wife, May, had passed from illness 4 winters ago, leaving him to raise their 2 teenagers alone while balancing days of mixing concrete, climbing scaffolds, and repairing roofs under the relentless sun. In Las Pedras, they called him Lao Shifu, the old craftsman, not out of jest but admiration. He outworked men half his age, never missed Sunday service, though he sat quietly in the back with dusty jeans and tired eyes, and never asked for help despite barely making ends meet. When a fierce dust storm tore through St. Anan's Church 2 years prior, collapsing its roof and shattering its stained glass, the town's spirit seemed to break with it. The ruin stood untouched, wrapped in caution tape, a silent wound. But Wei saw it differently. He took on the job no one else would, not for pay, it barely covered costs, but because something within him said it must be done. "You don't rebuild a church with money," he told a local shopkeeper. "You rebuild it with heart." Each morning after his prayer, Wei packed 3 things, a worn tool belt, a rice and vegetable wrap made by his daughter, and a small, laminated image of Kuan Yin tucked into the pocket of his faded work shirt. To outsiders, he was just a laborer. To the town, he was more. "That man builds with more than bricks," said Mrs. Liu, the local baker. "He builds with care." Even Father Liang, the aging priest who thought St. Anan's would remain a ruin, admitted quietly, "Wei isn't just fixing walls. He's mending what we lost inside." But no one, not his children, not the priest, not even Wei, knew a moment was coming that would test everything. A moment that would send him plummeting from over 30 feet in the air, no harness, no one to catch him, only to be stopped by something that silenced even those who hadn't prayed in years. There was nothing lavish about Wei Chen's life, but there was something undeniably sacred in how he lived it. His truck, a rattling 96 model, coughed with every start. He had no savings, no luxuries, no time to sit idle. Yet every brick he laid, every nail he drove, carried a devotion most reserved for sacred days. His mornings began early, not out of necessity but because he believed the divine was already awake, and he wouldn't keep it waiting. At 5:15 a.m., while the desert air still held a chill and coyotes called faintly, Wei was at the stove, boiling water for tea, 1 cup for him, one placed near a photo of May. It was a ritual born not of sorrow but of love that time couldn't erase. His children, Lin, 16, and Jian, 13, woke to the sound of his boots on the creaking floor and the scratch of a pencil as he jotted his work list on old receipts. They knew their father spoke little, but his smile after a long day's work told them they had enough. Their kitchen was simple, the furniture second-hand, the fridge covered with fading report cards, sketches, and a sticky note from Lin, "Faith isn't what you say. It's what you do when no one's looking." She'd written it after hearing her father say something close to it. In his truck's glove box, a string of prayer beads lay, smoothed by years of quiet, calloused fingers. His toolbox held not just tools but a small tin with 2 items, a prayer card for St. Joseph the Worker and that same image of Kuan Yin, its edges worn by sweat and sun. Townsfolk said Wei worked as if guided from above. He didn't preach or lecture, but when asked why he murmured something before climbing scaffolds, he'd tap his chest and say, "That's between me and her." When word spread that St. Anan's was being rebuilt, many assumed a big company had stepped in. But it was just Wei, working alone, sustained by neighbors' sandwiches and occasional bottles of water left on a ledge. Each afternoon, when the heat made tools too hot to grip, he'd remove his cap, wipe his brow, and gaze at the unfinished cross leaning crooked atop the church. His eyes said what words didn't: rebuilding wasn't about materials but about restoring hope. "Dad's no hero," Lin once told a friend. "But he carries a prayer instead of a wallet." That small image in his pocket was more than paper, it was his shield, his promise. No one noticed the scaffolding growing shakier each day or the slight limp in Wei's step after long hours. But one day, with a whisper of wind and a creak of metal, everything would change. Wei Chen never complained. He simply moved slower when his body ached and lingered longer in prayer before starting again. Each evening, as shadows stretched across the church's foundation, he packed his tools, touched the small image of Kuan Yin in his pocket, and whispered, "Xie xie." Not because the day was easy, but because he'd been kept safe once more. Yet safety, like faith, sometimes demands a trial. And Wei's trial was just one morning away. It was a Wednesday in early April, the sky over Las Pedras a piercing blue, the sun already baking the earth by 9 a.m. The air carried grit, the heat making metal groan and lips crack. Wei arrived first, as always, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his faded work shirt damp with sweat where the image of Kuan Yin rested over his heart. Today, he would check the final section of the bell tower's scaffolding, the highest, most exposed part of the project. The church's crossbeam loomed above, still crooked, waiting to be set right. Normally, he'd have sent a younger worker up. Hao, a college student helping for the summer, volunteered. So did Li, a high school senior earning extra money. But Wei shook his head, adjusting his gloves. "No," he said. "This is my responsibility. I promise to see it through." No one argued. His quiet determination silenced any debate. From below, Father Liang watched, arms crossed, lips moving in silent prayer. Lin, Wei's daughter, had brought him lunch and stood by the truck, unaware she was about to witness something unforgettable. Wei climbed deliberately, treating each rung like sacred ground. At the top, the scaffold swayed in the breeze. Metal creaked, wood shifted, but he stayed focused. He crouched, tested the anchor bolts with a wrench, adjusted the crossbeam, and ran his hand over the unfinished stone, a craftsman's blessing. Then came a sound that changed everything, a sharp clank, like a blade through silence. From below, Hao shouted, "Mr. Chen, the bar's giving way." Wei stood too quickly. A platform rail buckled. His foot slipped on loose grit, and in an instant, he was falling, over 30 feet, headfirst toward the concrete below. No harness, no net, nothing but a forgotten tarp tied loosely between two poles for shade. Lin dropped her lunch. Father Liang gasped. Hao rushed forward. Time seemed to shatter. Wei's body twisted midair, arms flailing, eyes wide but silent. He plummeted, but at that moment, a gust of wind lifted the tarp like a sail, and he landed directly on it. The fabric gave way under his weight but slowed his fall just enough for him to hit a pile of old cement bags and sand instead of bare concrete. It wasn't soft, but it was enough to save him. He lay still, shirt torn at the chest, blood trickling from his brow. Chaos erupted. Hao vaulted the fence. Father Liang knelt, praying. Lin sprinted, screaming, "Dad! Dad!" They pulled the tarp aside. Lin reached him first, her hands shaking as she checked his pulse. He was breathing, shallow, but alive. Then she saw it, the image of Kuan Yin, laminated and worn, split cleanly in two from the fall, and on Wei's chest, a bruise, circular, the exact shape and size of the image. Lin held the torn pieces like fragile relics, speechless. Hao whispered, that saved him. I swear it. Even the paramedic, arriving minutes later, muttered, "You don't survive a fall like that without help." Wei didn't wake that day, but he didn't die either. For the first time in years, the people of Las Pedras looked upward, not at their phones or routines, but at something greater. Something unexplainable had happened, and they knew it wasn't chance. It was a pause, a mercy, with a presence they felt but couldn't name. By sundown, word spread beyond the worksite, beyond the church, beyond anything Wei would have sought attention for. He fell, people murmured in shops and streets. He fell and lived. But it wasn't just his survival that shook the town, it was Hao. The tarp, the cement bags, the torn image of Kuan Yin, now in two pieces, marked with a strange imprint over his heart. It was too precise, too aligned, too sacred. No one said miracle aloud, not yet, but something had shifted. In a town where church attendance had dwindled and St. Anan's bell had long been silent, people began to stir, not out of habit but reverence. The next morning, before sunrise, someone left a candle where Wei had landed. An hour later, another brought prayer beads, draping them over a scaffold. A mother arrived with lotus flowers from her garden. A grandfather brought his grandson to stand quietly. By the third day, a small crowd gathered around the sand pile that had cradled Wei's fall. They spoke little, organized nothing, but came anyway, drawn by something beyond words. A woman absent from church for 15 years lit a candle, tears on her cheeks. A teenager who once scoffed at faith stood with folded hands, unaware he was praying. Even Father Liang, after decades of service, later told the bishop, "I didn't call them. They came because they saw something no sermon could capture." Wei Chen lay still in a hospital room 2 towns over, bandaged, bruised, his heartbeat steady but faint. A nurse, Mei Ling Zhao, gently placed the torn image of Kuan Yin beside his bed at Lin's request. Each day, more people gathered at the ruins of St. Anan's, not to work but to witness. They brought folding chairs, umbrellas for shade, and began what some called the silent prayer. No announcements, no hymns, just people praying. By week's end, the site of Wei's fall resembled a shrine, chalk lotuses on the ground, candles melted into cracks, scraps of paper with handwritten prayers tucked under bricks. One note read, "If you held him, maybe you'll hold me too." The town's hardware store owner, Mr. Huang, who had turned from faith after losing his daughter in an accident, donated wood and concrete mix, saying, "I don't know about miracles, but I see what this is doing for people." Even the mayor appeared unannounced, stood silently for 10 minutes, then left with red eyes, saying nothing. A camera crew from Santa Fe arrived but left quickly. "They're not here for news," the producer said. "They're guarding something." And they were. The construction site had become sacred ground, unclaimed, unspoken, but understood. Something holy had happened. The shift was quiet, like breath after tears, like grace settling in dust and sunlight. People returned to mass. Parents brought their teens. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years shared pews. The bell tower remained silent, but something deeper resonated. On the 7th night, Wei stirred in the hospital. He didn't speak or rise, but his hand drifted to his chest, searching where the image of Kuan Yin once lay. Mei Ling, the nurse, gasped and placed the torn image in his fingers. His thumb traced the crease, and for the first time since the fall, he smiled. In Las Pedras, no headlines were needed, no church declarations, no testimony from Wei. They had seen it together and believed together. Wei returned to the site not with tools but with a folding chair, a worn notebook, and a gaze more silent than words. Doctors warned his ribs were healing, his left arm weak, but his heart pulled him forward, even if his steps were slow. He no longer climbed or lifted heavy loads. Instead, he sat in the shade of the half-finished bell tower, a thermos of tea beside him, the taped-together image of Kuan Yin resting on a crate like an old friend. No one asked why he returned. They knew. One morning, something changed. Wei didn't take his usual seat. Instead, he carried 3 red bricks in a plastic tub and set them near where he'd fallen. Slowly, painfully, he pressed one into the earth, then another, then another. Father Liang, bringing a rice wrap, stopped and asked, "Wei, what are you building?" Wei didn't look up. He whispered, "She held me. Now I build her a place to stay." It wasn't proclaimed or posted online, but word spread. The next day, Hao, the college student, brought a bag of mortar. Mr. Huang dropped off unused cement. By week's end, 15 others left materials, some at night, some with trembling hands, no words. They didn't call it an altar at first, just Wei's spot. And Wei kept building, not tall or wide, but with a precision only devotion could measure. Each brick seemed to carry a name. After every row, he paused, bowed his head, and spoke softly, words only the wind heard. Some said he prayed, others, that he remembered. All agreed it wasn't construction, it was reverence. A woman, Li Na, whose son struggled with addiction, brought a small ceramic Kuan Yin statue, chipped but whole, and placed it on the 3rd row. Wei gazed at it, then nodded. "She's home." No one suggested marble or gold. This wasn't for show but a thank you built from what people had. Children drew chalk lotuses on nearby stones. Elders stood, caps in hand. Teens who once mocked faith left wildflowers in tin cans. The altar rose, waist-high, unadorned, with a wooden bench Wei sanded and painted himself. Under a glowing orange sky, he carved 7 words on it, "Where grace held me, she will rest." One morning, Father Liang found Wei beside the finished altar, fingers dusted, the framed image of Kuan Yin beside him. "Why here?" the priest asked. "Why not wait for the church to be finished, place her inside?" Wei looked at the bricks, his voice steady. "This is where she found me. You don't forget where heaven reached down to lift you up." No one questioned it. The altar wasn't Wei's alone anymore, it belonged to Las Pedras, a place where pain became peace, where questions found rest without answers. Some came to weep, some to kneel, some to sit and breathe, feeling something long forgotten. Over time, the small square of bricks with its uneven edges and sun-faded Kuan Yin statue became the heart of Las Pedras. Not for its appearance, but for what it held, a moment, a mystery, and a man who said thank you by building something unrepayable. By late summer, Wei Chen's steps grew slower, his breath shorter. The desert heat, once a mere annoyance, now settled into his bones. His left hand trembled when he lifted his tea, his knees creaked when he rose from the bench by the altar. Yet he came daily. Locals said they could set their clocks by him. Before sunrise, Wei's silhouette appeared on the gravel path to the altar of gratitude, now a sacred place for half the town. What no one saw was how hard it was for him to rise each morning. Lin noticed first. He winced climbing out of the truck, lingered longer on the porch, and sometimes his gaze drifted mid-conversation, not from distraction but exhaustion. "You need rest, Dad," she'd whisper. Wei would smile, touch the image of Kuan Yin over his heart, and say, "There's still something to finish." He wasn't speaking of bricks anymore. One Tuesday morning, Hao, the college student back for the summer, saw a change. Wei wasn't laying bricks, he was writing. A small notebook lay open on the bench, blue ink smudged at the edges, his pen gripped tightly despite trembling fingers. Hao hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Chen, what are you working on?" Wei paused, eyes on the page, and said, "A different kind of foundation." It wasn't a diary or a letter. Each entry was a whisper, a memory, a prayer. Some were brief, "She didn't hold me to make me a hero. She held me to show them she still sees us." Others stretched longer. "As a boy, I thought miracles came with thunder and light. They come in quiet mornings, wrapped in tarp and dust." Over weeks, the notebook filled. People saw Wei wasn't just building with bricks anymore but crafting something unseen yet enduring, a story, a record, a spiritual legacy. He called it the final layer. Lin found the title scrawled on the back cover one evening while tidying the bench. "What's the final layer?" she asked. Wei's voice was soft. "The church has its roof, but faith always needs one more layer." By mid-September, Wei could no longer walk the full path to the altar. Lin drove him halfway, and he shuffled the rest with a cane left anonymously by the Kuan Yin statue, carved with the words, "The man who never fell." Wei chuckled. "They didn't see the bruises," he said. "But it's fine. Sometimes belief needs a little exaggeration." He wrote until the final page, ending with, "This altar isn't for me. It's to remind you she's still here. That's enough." That evening, he closed the notebook and handed it to Lin without fanfare, just a nod and a quiet, "Don't lose the last page." She held it like it was fragile. The wind seemed gentler around Wei now. The sun lingered longer when he sat beneath the chapel cross. Birds perched closer. Strangers brought water unasked. He spoke less, but his silences carried a message carved in ink, breath, brick, and bone. Even when the body falters, the spirit builds. And Wei Chen was still building, one word at a time. It happened quietly, as Las Pedras somehow knew it would. No sirens, no rush, just peace. The night before, Wei asked Lin and Jian to sit with him on the porch. Now older, they sensed a shift. He wore his best jacket, the one Mei used to smooth before Sunday service, and lit a candle by the small altar in their yard. The flame danced in the desert breeze but held steady. Wei said little, gazing at the stars, cane against his knee, the worn, taped image of Kuan Yin in his hand. After a pause, he turned to Lin. "Remember the notebook?" She nodded, eyes wet. "Open it when you need to believe again. Not in me, but in what held me." Jian, ever quiet, rested his head on his father's shoulder. Wei sat steady, soaking in the warmth of the two reasons he kept going after the fall. Later, he asked Lin to leave the window cracked, so the wind can come through. She smiled and complied. In the early hours before dawn, Wei passed in his sleep, peaceful, as if stepping into something familiar. Lin found him at sunrise, one hand over his heart, the other clutching the torn, taped image of Kuan Yin, now sacred. No tears came at first, just a stillness, like the house itself paused. Lin draped a blanket over him, knelt, and whispered one word, "Xie, not goodbye, not why, just thank you." News of Wei Chen's passing spread through Las Pedras before noon. There were no loud wails or public displays of grief. Instead, people walked quietly to the altar he'd built with his hands and heart. Hao arrived first, carrying a new notebook and pen. Father Liang followed, holding incense and a worn wooden cross from the church's original altar. Then came others, teachers, mechanics, farmers, teenagers, elders with canes and prayer beads, even the mayor in his Sunday suit. Words were scarce. They placed candles around the altar, flowers on the bricks, hands on shoulders. "He didn't just survive the fall," Father Liang said softly to no one in particular. "He rose to show us how to kneel." That evening, Lin opened the notebook Wei had given her. The last page, in shaky but clear handwriting, read, "If the first fall was mercy, then let this last sleep be into her embrace." She copied the words onto a wooden sign and placed it by the altar the next morning. Wei's funeral had no grand tomb or polished speeches, just a simple cross, a guzheng playing a soft melody, and a long line of people who came not from obligation but transformation. Some laid stones like the early church, others left notes. Jian, quiet as ever, touched the taped image of Kuan Yin gently before walking away. As the sun sank, a golden sliver of light broke through the clouds, resting briefly on the statue's shoulder, and for a moment, it seemed to smile. Wei Chen had no statue, no named street, no headlines, but his altar stood, more than enough. After his passing, something unexpected began. People came not just from Las Pedras or nearby towns but from counties away, even out of state. They didn't come for the unfinished church but for the bench, the bricks, the altar on the hill where the light fell softer. Some heard of the man who survived the fall, others, of a place where prayers felt heavier. Most came because someone whispered, "You just have to go." Every Sunday, candles appeared before dawn. Children left notes in plastic bags, "Please heal my dad. Help me be less afraid. Tell her I'm trying." Veterans sat in silence, saluting the Kuan Yin statue as if it wore their old uniform. A woman, Mei Ling, estranged from her brother for a decade, knelt and prayed for courage to reach out. A teen left his vape pen under the bench and walked away barefoot. A man in a suit whispered, "Forgive me," as if the words finally mattered. The altar didn't judge, it stood, as Wei had. Father Liang began holding monthly services by the altar, no microphone, just prayers and communion passed hand to hand. At each service, he placed Wei's notebook, now in a glass case near the statue. People lined up not to read it but to touch it, as if it held Wei's warmth. He didn't build it for fame, Father Liang often said. He built it because he remembered what saved him. And in that remembering, others found their own. Lin and Jian visited weekly, bringing flowers or silence, always gratitude. Lin kept a second notebook, filling it with visitors' stories. One wrote, "I came to end my life that night. I didn't." Another, "My baby was born too early. The nurse gave me this altar's photo to hold. My baby lived." None of it was shared online or turned into profit, yet the altar's meaning grew. The bricks never cracked, the bench never splintered, and the chipped Kuan Yin statue stood firm through October rains and desert winds. One day, Jian, now a young man with his father's shoulders and his mother's calm, saw a girl drawing with chalk at the altar. "What's your name?" he asked. "It doesn't matter," she said, then looked up. "Is it true a man fell but didn't fall all the way?" Jian paused, then nodded. "Yeah. He fell into something stronger than gravity." She smiled, placed a flower by the bricks, and left. No words, but it said everything. Wei's name faded from talk, but his presence lingered, in whispered prayers once unspoken, in the hush over even the rowdiest kids on the altar's ground, in the peace people carried away. Not because problems vanished, but because they were shared. Wei Chen never sought a legacy, he held his faith long enough for others to take it up. And they did, one by one, brick by brick. In an age of noise and distraction, when miracles were dismissed and silence mistaken for absence, one man's quiet fall and quieter faith left a mark no algorithm could measure. Wei's altar still stands, not in a grand cathedral but under the open sky, windswept and sun-warmed, in a dusty corner of a small New Mexico town. No fees, no ads, just a bench, a statue, and a story carried like a hidden flame. Each week, someone new arrives, a woman with an unnamed diagnosis, a father clutching a photo of a lost daughter, a man in a suit, heavy with regret. They come in silence, stay longer than planned, and leave changed. A teenager left a receipt under the altar stone, didn't believe in anything. Now I might. I still don't know if I believe. But today, I felt something believed in me. That kind of miracle doesn't go viral, it transforms. Local legends grow with time. Some say Wei Chen saw a light as he fell. Others claim the tarp lifted like a divine hand. Some believe the bruise on his chest, shaped like Kuan Yin's silhouette, was no accident but a mark of grace. Those who knew him best, though, tell it differently. He didn't fall into a miracle, Father Liang once told a visiting priest. He fell with faith, and the miracle followed. It was a quiet miracle, not for spectacle but for sustaining, not to be worshipped but witnessed, not for headlines but for hearts. Years later, St. Ainan's was completed, stained glass restored, bell tower rebuilt, roof sealed against desert winds. Yet people still flock to the brick altar on the hill's edge, where the air feels gentler, time slows, and words like hope, grace, and mercy feel like breath. Lin, now a mother, brings her daughter every Sunday, letting her run barefoot through the gravel paths before kneeling together by the statue. "This is where your grandfather met Kuan Yin," she says. Jian, reserved in public, guides quiet groups, veterans, students, struggling families, sharing his father's story with calm dignity, not drama. At the local school, a new elective emerged, Community and Faith, the story of Las Pedras. It's taught not with exams but with open journals and long silences. At night, when the site is empty, solar lanterns flicker around the altar, casting shadows that stretch across the bricks. Some swear they've seen a figure sitting quietly on the bench, listening. A wind chime, hung by a child with autism, plays a soft tune when no one's near, and the birds hush, as if listening too. Call it folklore or chance, but in a skeptical age, something undeniable lingers, not in the bricks or statue, but in the burdened, broken, searching people who leave standing taller, lighter, seen. It wasn't Way's survival that changed Los Pedras, it was his response. He didn't shout or preach. He didn't build grand walls. He built a place to say thank you. And because he did, the world, piece by piece, prayer by prayer, began to remember how. If you pass a quiet hill in southern New Mexico and see a clearing with a stone bench and a statue, no sign in sight, pull over. Sit. Listen. You may not hear words, but you might feel something deeper, a silence where faith still speaks. That's a miracle in modern America.